Hey everyone, this is Pallavi and I'm back with the 23rd game of the book Chess The Art of Logical Thinking by Neil MacDonald. This game was played between Karpov and Kasparov during 1986 World Championship, which was held in London and Leningrad. The opening played was Grunfeld Defence. The game emphasizes strategic planning, pawn structure understanding, and adaptability in chess. Karpov's preventive approach and capitalization on positional advantages in this game provide valuable lessons. So without further ado, let's start. White started with d4. Controlling the center, stopping black from pushing his pawn to e5 and also stopping black from developing his b8 knight to c6 where it could be vulnerable to white's pawn advance to d5. And it's also making way for the c1 bishop to come out. Knight f6. In these kinds of chess beginnings, black usually lets white build a classic pawn structure, pawn center. However, black plans to attack it using pieces and disrupt it by moving pawns strategically by holding off on moving their central pawns quickly. Black keeps some flexibility but gives up control of the center to white. c4. It's white's job and opportunity to use the advantage of moving first by advancing pawns towards the center. Choosing knight c3 wouldn't work as well because after d5, white loses the main plan of putting pressure on d5 with c2 to c4 due to the knight blocking the way. So white played c4, now black played g6. With this move, black plans to position their dark squared bishop with g7 and put pressure on white's center using pieces and well-timed pawn moves. After g6, certain strategies become clear. Keeping the dark square bishop safe is crucial for black's protection after castling on the king side. However, g6 also makes the dark squares around black's king vulnerable. Without the dark square bishop, controlling squares like f6 and h6 becomes challenging, posing risks for black. Despite being a defensive piece on g7, black can become powerful if the center opens up through pawn exchanges, providing it with a clear diagonal toward white's queen side. Now white played knight c3. Now that his pawn is on c4, white strengthens his hold on d5. Now black played d5. This immediate challenge to the white center constitutes the Grunfeld defense. In contrast to the king's Indian defense, black doesn't allow his opponent to build a pawn center undisturbed after bishop g7 and then e4. So d5 and then white played bishop f4. Karpov avoids the main line with c takes d5, then knight takes d5 and then e4 and then knight takes c3 and then b takes c3. That's the main line. So if instead of in entering games, he has played with Kasparov from that position, the 12th world champion opts for a simpler strategy, which is bishop f4. He focuses on direct development, bringing his bishop on to a central square before playing e2 to e3 and prevent it from being restricted. So bishop f4, bishop to g7. As planned, positioning the bishop to g7 indicates Kasparov's intention to target the white center. e3. Prioritizing safety. This pawn move paves the way for the king's bishop development and fortifies the d4 pawn, anticipating black's next move c5. Black maximizes efforts to strengthen the bishop on g7, a crucial piece in the opening strategy. This involves attacking the d4 pawn, akin to white's approach in the queen's gambit, which is d4, d5 and then c4. The rationale is twofold. First, if white overlooks the threat c5 takes d4, will weaken the d4 point. Second, if d4 takes c5 occurs, black anticipates reclaiming the pawn once the bishop is unobstructed on d4. Now white played d takes c5. Karpov captures material, initiating a tense tactical battle. The question looms: will black recover the pawn with a solid game or face repercussions for aggressive play early in the game? Black played queen a5. The counterattack continues by exerting more pressure on c3 with the queen. The imminent threat is knight e4, combining the forces of the queen, bishop and knight on the pinned white knight. Rook c1. Simple and safe. White strengthens the knight for the upcoming attack. Knight e4. Black presses on eagerly with his attack on c3. C takes d5. Karpov decides it's the right time to take the advantage. With two extra center pawns, Kasparov needs a significant plan to cause trouble for white. Knight takes c3. The only way to disturb white's setup as giving up the bishop would be nonsensical, because if bishop takes c3 check, b takes c3 and then knight takes c3 is a blunder because of queen d2 and black can already resign. This scenario provides a hint about the optimal response for white to the current move. Knight takes c3. Queen d2. Exactly. The knight can't run away as it is pinned. So this is much better than the automatic b takes c3. Then bishop takes c3 check, forcing king e2 is excellent for black. So white played queen d2 a good move. Queen takes a2. Black has little choice but to snatch back some material. This is the most disruptive way to do it, as if queen takes c5 instead, then b takes c3 leaves white with a far more solid pawn structure. So queen takes a2 and then b takes c3. Only now does white regain his piece. Queen takes d2 check. The idea behind this move is intriguing, ambitious and challenging for the opponent to respond correctly. However, it turns out to be a mistake. Opting for queen a5 would have been a better choice for black. This move could have helped black recover material with moves like knight f3, then knight d7, bishop c4, queen takes c5, bishop a2. Even though white would still have an extra center pawn, black could have improved the chances by playing precisely, preparing for moves like e3 to e4, then e5 after castling. Despite this, it would have been a better alternative compared to the difficulties black faces in the current game. So black played queen takes d2 check, white captured with the king, knight d7, developing and trying to capture the c5 pawn, and followed by knight b3 check and fork. If now white plays c6, then b takes c6, d takes c6 and then knight c5. It's bad for white as the c6 pawn is bound to be lost. So after king takes d2 and knight d7, now white played a good move, which is bishop to b5. Karpov prepares to eliminate the knight. It is important to highlight that Karpov's exchange is a strategic move aimed at draining energy from black's position by limiting the effectiveness of the bishops. It's not merely a narrow attempt to cling to the c5 pawn for an extended period. Now bishop b5. black played kingside castle. Black breaks the pin, develops his king's rooks, and forces white's hand over the capture on d7. Bishop takes d7. There is no turning back. The knight has to be removed because it causes havoc after knight takes e5. So bishop takes d7 and then black captured, bishop takes d7. Superficially, black's situation appears favorable, possessing two bishops, a passed pawn on a7, and a potential reclaim the pawn with moves like rook c8 and then rook takes c5. But white played a good move, e4. However, Karpov's substantial advantage lies in his concentrated central pawns. He skillfully anticipated their potential to confine at least one of Kasparov's bishops while creating a passed pawn. f5. If immediately rook fc8 instead, then bishop e3 holds on to the pawn. So black played f5 and then white played e5. Now white's strategy unfolds as the e5 pawn confines the bishop on g7. However, there's a still concern that white's center would weaken under the pressure from black's pieces. Black played e6. Kasparov challenges the pawn structure again, aiming to destabilize it. If d6 is played right now, then rook ac8 with the intention of rook takes c8, rook takes c5, then bishop c6, etc. would be highly unfavorable for white. Even responding with bishop e3 is problematic, as bishop takes e5 would activate the king's bishop. This is why Kasparov maneuvered white into playing e5. So after e5, black played e6. Now white played another good move, c4. Luckily, there is an additional supporting pillar for the d5 pawn. Rook fc8. Finally, black is prepared to reclaim the pawn with rook takes c5. His rook will exert overwhelming pressure on both d5 and c5 and c4, further reinforced by rook ac8 and if needed. In such a scenario, white's center would crumble, exposing the flaw in the entire opening strategy, and he would be fighting for a draw. However, Karpov has different plans. Now Karpov played a brilliant move, c6. The pawn is lost, and Karpov gives it up in a way that's not good for his opponent. B takes c6, only move, and then d6. Now the impact of c6, white's c6 move, on black's position is evident. His queenside pawns are divided. The bishop on d7 is confined. The rook on c8 can no longer target c4 or d5. Now black played c5. Frustrated in breaking down the white center, Kasparov tries to re-energize his position by reopening a diagonal for his bishop on d7. However, this comes at a cost. The c5 pawn is severely weak and the bishop on g7 becomes permanently trapped. A more crucial move would have been g5, a good move. Then bishop takes g5, bishop takes e5, but after c5, white securely defends the passed pawn, leaving the black queen's bishop confined to d7. So black played c5. Now white played another good move, h4. Karpov blocks the bishop on g7 from escaping and disrupts black's plan to break out with g6 to g5 by adding extra protection to the g5 square. h6. Black brings back the idea of breaking free with g5, and then h takes g5, h takes g5, bishop takes g5, and then bishop takes e5. White played another brilliant move, knight h3. Now white has two goals here. Keep the bishop on g7 restricted by controlling g5, and attack and win the c5 pawn by placing the knight on d3 and the bishop on e3. The expected move was knight f3, aiming to control the g5 square and set up to capture the c5 pawn with knight e1, knight d3, and then bishop e3. However, this plan backfires when black responds with bishop c6. So after bishop c6, if white continues with knight e1, then black planning for knight d3, black can break free with g5. On the other hand, if black captures the knight on f3 with bishop takes f3, the hold on the g5 square is broken and black can play g5. So choosing knight f3 makes white two goals incompatible. However, Karpov's brilliant move of putting the knight on h3 changes everything. Although it might seem like an inferior squared compared to f3, in the middle game, every move should align with the player's plan, not just appear natural. So knight h3, a brilliant move. a5. Black takes the advantage of his advanced pawn right away, seeing it as the best opportunity to turn the game and around. No need to worry just yet, as white's knight is distant from d3. If it ever gets there, black can still use the familiar g6 g5 move to break free. White played a good move, f3. Nonetheless, Karpov prepares the way for his knight to reach d3. a4. The passed pawn speeds ahead, trying to divert white from their strategic plan. White played rook he1. This basic move crushes all of black's hopes. By protecting e5 with his rook, Karpov eliminates the possibility of bishop takes e5 and makes the idea of g6 to g5 ineffective. Consequently, his knight is no longer bound to guarding the g5 square and can now move to d3 easily. This crucial in-between move or intermediate move wouldn't have been feasible if white had opted for knight f3 instead of knight h3, and then after knight f3 then knight e1 instead of the knight h3. So now black played a3. The advance persists, but it seems futile since the pawn can never expect assistance from the g7 bishop. Knight f2. The knight persists on its journey. a2. So near yet so far. White is winning rather than losing for only one reason. He has restrained the black bishop on g7. Chess strategy involves hindering your opponent's pieces as much as enhancing the effectiveness of your own. Now, white played knight d3. The final result of a great move that started with knight h3. In this position, the knight protects the b2 from a possible invasion by rook b8 and then rook b2 check. The knight also targets the c5, getting ready for bishop e3 and then knight takes c5. Safeguards e5 to prevent bishop cross e5 after the bishop goes to e3. And the knight is ready for maneuvers against the a2 pawn. So after knight e3, black played rook a3. Kasparov tries his best to create counterplay by setting a clever trap. Now white played rook a1, a good move. Safety first. If white had played bishop e3 instead, black can break out of the bind with rook takes d3 check, then king takes d3, then bishop takes e5. Karpov chooses to keep bishop e3 as a potential threat to disrupt black's pieces. A simpler winning plan has surfaced, attacking and capturing the impulsive advanced pawn. Rook a1. g5. Instead of waiting for a gradual defeat, black makes a desperate move. H takes g5, then h takes g5, and now bishop takes g5. The first material gain for white's well executed strategy. King f7. This seemingly aimless move admits that the breakout attempt was a mistake. However, Kasparov still has a few tactical tricks that could surprise a less cautious opponent. Bishop f4. White takes his time to capitalize on his advantage, since black can do little if Karpov stays vigilant. There is no need to rush. First and foremost, he reestablishes a firm control over the e5 square. Rook b8. If now white is tempted by knight takes c5, then black escapes with rook b2 check, king c1, rook takes g2 when it is a perpetual check after knight d7, then rook c3 check, king d1, rook d3 check, king c1, and then rook c3 check, etc. So after rook b8, now white played a good move. Rook e c1. Karpov remains focused on his systematic strategy. The main play is to capture the passed pawn with rook c2. Then knight c1 and potentially rook takes on a2. Additionally, knight takes c5 is followed by rook b2 check, and then rook c2 is a potential threat to further trouble black. Now black played bishop c6. This is the last attempt to create some confusion, because after knight takes c5, then bishop takes f3, g takes f3, and then rook takes f3. Now white played rook c3. Once again, Karpov denies his opponent any chance of counterplay. The rook is compelled to abandon its advantageous position on a3, since the exchange of rooks either through rook takes c3, king takes c3, or rook b1, rook takes a3, rook takes a1, knight c2 results in a completely hopeless situation. So here rook a5, and then here black's move becomes less effective as the rook is now mainly focused on defending a2 and c5. Rook c2. After removing the rook from a3, white shifts his focus to the main goal, capturing the a2 pawn. Rook ba8. Now the other black rook is compelled into a passive role. Knight c1. There is no defense against this a2 capture, where white has two extra pawns and can also target a third pawn on c5. Hence white, since it's not surprising that black resigned. Karpov demonstrated an excellent preventive chess, while the knight on c1 played a significant role. The true standout was the pawn on e5, effectively holding black's army in check throughout the game. So after knight c1, black resigned. Some key principles and lessons learned from the game. Center control. Controlling the center is crucial. Karpov strategically placed pieces and pawns to dominate central squares. Piece activity. Both players focused on active piece play. Karpov restricted black's movements while Kasparov sought counterplay through the active pieces. Pawn structure awareness. Understanding and manipulating pawn structures was key. Karpov's pawn moves limited Kasparov's options and created weaknesses. Prophylactic moves. Karpov's 20th move knight h3 showed prophylactic thinking, anticipating and preventing potential counterplay. Piece coordination. Effective coordination, especially among rooks and bishops, influenced the game's dynamics. Patience and prevention. Karpov's patient, preventive chess style avoided unnecessary risks and built up advantages. Pawn leverage. The e5 pawn played a pivotal role in restricting Kasparov's counterplay. Flexible planning. Karpov adjusted plans according to the changing game dynamics. Understanding pawn breaks. Both players demonstrated knowledge of pawn breaks to disrupt the opponent's structure. Endgame awareness. The transition to the game showcased Karpov's ability to convert advantages efficiently. Thank you for watching. I hope you learned something from this video as well. Please like, comment, share and subscribe to my channel to show some support. Thank you. See you in the next video. Bye-bye.